You won't believe what happened when a female soldier was completely ignored by her superiors during a critical military operation. Everything seemed lost until she noticed something that no one else had seen. What she discovered didn't just save lives, but completely changed everyone's perspective about who she really was. Let me tell you about Sarah Collins, a 28-year-old soldier whose story will make you question everything you think you know about judging people by their appearance. This is a story about prejudice, overlooked brilliance, and a twist that will leave you speechless. The morning sun cast long shadows through the barracks windows as she prepared for what would become the most important day of her military career. Born in Detroit to a single mother who worked 3 jobs, Sarah had always been underestimated. Her mother, Grace Collins, cleaned offices at night, served lunch at a school cafeteria during the day, and took in laundry on weekends just to keep food on the table. Sarah grew up watching her mother's quiet strength, never complaining, despite the exhaustion that lined her face by evening. It was Grace who first taught Sarah that sometimes the most powerful weapon you possess is the one others can't see. Education is your ammunition, Grace would say, sitting at their small kitchen table, helping Sarah with homework after her 12-hour workdays. Load yourself up with knowledge, baby girl, because they can take everything from you, but they can't take what's in your head. Sarah took those words to heart. While her classmates spent evenings watching television, she buried herself in books about languages, codes, and military history. She spoke fluent Spanish, decent French, and had taught herself basic Arabic and Mandarin using library books and online resources. Her fascination with cryptography began in high school when she discovered how Navajo code talkers had helped win World War II. The idea that language could be a weapon, that communication could determine the fate of nations, captivated her young mind. When Sarah enlisted at 18, she scored in the 99th percentile on the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. Her recruiter, Sergeant Martinez, had looked at her scores twice, convinced there had been a mistake. "These numbers," he said, adjusting his glasses, "these are some of the highest we've seen this year. You could go anywhere with scores like these." But Sarah wanted combat experience. She wanted to prove herself where it mattered most, in the field where life and death decisions separated the capable from the mediocre. So she chose infantry, much to everyone's surprise and, as she would later learn, their skepticism. Basic training at Fort Moore was where Sarah first encountered the wall of doubt that would follow her throughout her career. While she excelled in physical fitness, marksmanship, and tactical exercises, her drill sergeants seemed perpetually surprised by her performance. Not bad for a... They would start, then catch themselves, finishing with vague praise that felt more like backhanded compliments. Her fellow recruits were a mixed bag. Some, like Tommy Rodriguez from Texas and Marcus Johnson from Alabama, respected her abilities and became genuine friends. Others, particularly those from small towns who had never worked alongside black women, treated her like a curiosity at best, a liability at worst. The worst was Bradley Hutchinson, a stocky blonde from rural Montana whose father had been a Marine and whose grandfather had served in Vietnam. Brad had grown up hearing stories about military brotherhood and the importance of tradition. To him, Sarah represented a departure from that tradition, a political experiment that had no place in real combat situations. "I'm not saying she can't pull a trigger," Brad would mutter to his buddies during breaks, "but when bullets start flying, you want someone watching your back who's been raised for this, you know? Someone who understands what it really means to serve." These conversations weren't whispered. Brad made sure Sarah could hear them, studying her face for reactions. But Sarah had learned early in life not to give bullies the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. She kept her expression neutral, her focus on her duties, and her mouth shut unless directly addressed by superior officers. After basic training, Sarah's exceptional scores earned her a spot in advanced individual training for military intelligence. This was where her natural gift for languages and pattern recognition truly shone. She absorbed information like a sponge, quickly mastering communication intercept procedures, signal analysis, and most importantly for her future cryptographic operations. Her instructors were impressed, but puzzled. Captain Elizabeth Warren, a career intelligence officer who had spent 15 years in various global hotspots, pulled Sarah aside after a particularly challenging exercise in code breaking. "Collins, your test scores are extraordinary," Captain Warren said, reviewing Sarah's file in her small office decorated with maps of conflict zones from around the world. "You solved that Vietnamese cipher in half the time it took your classmates, and you caught errors in the translation that even I missed. Have you considered a career in pure intelligence work? You could be stationed at NSA headquarters, working on some of the most sensitive communications in the world." Sarah appreciated the offer, but her answer was immediate. "Thank you, ma'am, but I want to be where the action is. I want to use these skills in the field, with troops who depend on accurate intelligence for their lives." Captain Warren nodded, though her expression showed concern. "I respect that, Collins. Just remember, the field can be challenging for someone with your background. Not everyone will appreciate what you bring to the table initially. You may have to prove yourself repeatedly in ways that others don't." Those words proved prophetic. When Sarah graduated and was assigned to Alpha Company at Fort Bragg, she found herself once again having to demonstrate her competence to skeptical colleagues. The reconnaissance unit was considered elite, composed of soldiers who had proven themselves in previous deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. Many had combat experience that Sarah lacked, and they weren't shy about reminding her. The company was led by Major David Thompson, a career officer in his early 40s who had served 4 tours in combat zones. Thompson was professional but distant with Sarah, treating her competently, but without the camaraderie he showed the other soldiers. He seemed to view her as a necessary diversity hire rather than a genuine asset to the unit. "Collins, you'll be handling communications and intelligence support," he told her during her first week. "Your job is to keep us connected to command and help interpret any intercepted communications. Think you can handle that?" The way he asked the question, as if he were assigning her to file paperwork rather than crucial battlefield intelligence, told Sarah everything she needed to know about his expectations. She was there to fill a slot, not to contribute meaningfully to operations. Her fellow soldiers were a mixture of indifference and skepticism. The veterans like Staff Sergeant Mike Peterson, who had lost friends in Kandahar, viewed her as unproven. The newer soldiers like Brad Hutchinson, who had somehow managed to get assigned to the same unit, saw her as a quota fulfillment who would need protection when things got serious. Only a few soldiers treated her as an equal. Specialist Carlos Mendez, a medic from Phoenix, and Private First Class Jamie Chen, a communications expert from California, welcomed her skills and treated her as a valued team member. But they were exceptions in a unit where most conversations stopped when she entered the room. The daily humiliations were small but constant. During morning briefings, Major Thompson would ask for input from everyone except Sarah, even when the discussion involved communication protocols she had helped develop. When the unit conducted training exercises, she was invariably assigned to rear echelon positions despite her expertise in signal interception and analysis. The worst incident occurred during a field training exercise in the North Carolina mountains. The unit was practicing infiltration and reconnaissance tactics when they encountered a simulated enemy force using encrypted radio communications. Sarah immediately recognized patterns in the transmissions that suggested the enemy was using a modified version of a Soviet-era cipher she had studied extensively. "Sir," she said to Major Thompson during a tactical pause, "I think I can break their communication code. The pattern suggests they're using a variation of the VIC cipher with American commercial code modifications." Thompson barely looked up from his map. "Collins, we have specialists for that kind of work. Your job is to maintain radio contact with headquarters and relay information, not play cryptanalyst. "But sir, if I could just have 15 minutes with the intercepts, I'm confident I could—" "Collins." Thompson's voice carried a warning tone. "Stay in your lane. Peterson, get on the radio and request analytical support from intelligence. We need professionals to handle this." Sarah watched as Peterson made the radio call, knowing that by the time intelligence analysts back at base reviewed the intercepts, processed them through official channels, and returned results, the exercise would be over. Meanwhile, the solution was obvious to her trained eye, sitting ignored because it came from someone they didn't trust to think above her supposed skill level. 3 hours later, when official analysis confirmed exactly what Sarah had identified within minutes, no one acknowledged her initial assessment. The missed opportunity didn't matter in a training exercise, but Sarah couldn't help wondering what would happen in a real combat situation where time measured the difference between life and death. The pattern continued through months of training and preparation. Sarah's suggestions were ignored, her expertise dismissed, and her contributions minimized. She began to understand that proving herself wouldn't be a matter of demonstrating competence once, but of repeatedly exceeding expectations until even the most skeptical colleagues couldn't deny her abilities. She threw herself into additional training, studying foreign languages in her spare time, practicing code-breaking exercises, and maintaining physical fitness standards that exceeded unit requirements. She volunteered for extra duties, worked longer hours than anyone else, and never complained about the subtle slights and overt dismissals that punctuated her daily routine. Her mother called every Sunday, and Sarah found herself struggling to maintain positivity during those conversations. Grace Collins had raised her daughter to be strong, but she also had an intuitive understanding of the challenges Sarah faced. "Baby girl, are they treating you right?" Grace would ask, her voice carrying the same protective concern it had when Sarah was 8 years old and coming home from school with scraped knees and hurt feelings. "I'm fine, Mama," Sarah would say, standing outside the barracks on Sunday afternoons, watching other soldiers head into town or video chat with their families. "Just working hard, learning a lot. You know," Grace would continue, "your grandmother used to tell me that sometimes the good Lord puts us in places where people can't see our worth immediately. She said that's when we have to trust that our moment will come. And when it does, we better be ready to shine so bright they can't ignore us anymore." Sarah held onto those words through the long months of preparation, through the dismissive glances and the patronizing assignments. She continued to excel in every metric that could be measured, hoping that eventually her competence would speak louder than their preconceptions. That opportunity was about to present itself in a way none of them could have imagined. What started as routine deployment preparation would become a test not just of Sarah's abilities, but of everything she had learned about perseverance, intelligence, and the power of being underestimated by people who should have known better. The deployment briefing came on a Tuesday morning in March. Major Thompson stood before the assembled unit in the same briefing room where Sarah had first reported 6 months earlier, but now the atmosphere was different. The casual training environment had been replaced by the focused tension that accompanied real-world missions. "Gentlemen, and Collins," Thompson began, his acknowledgement of Sarah feeling like an afterthought, "we've received orders for immediate deployment to an undisclosed location in Eastern Europe. Intelligence suggests increased militant activity in the region, and our job is reconnaissance and intelligence gathering in support of NATO operations." The room buzzed with quiet excitement. Most of the soldiers had been hoping for deployment, eager to put their training to practical use and earn the combat experience that distinguished career military personnel from weekend warriors. Sarah felt the same anticipation, mixed with nervous energy about finally having a chance to prove her worth in real operational conditions. "This isn't Afghanistan or Iraq," Thompson continued, pulling down a map that showed terrain features without identifying specific countries. We're dealing with sophisticated adversaries who have modern equipment, professional training, and home field advantage. Intelligence is crucial to mission success and, more importantly, to everyone coming home safely. Sarah noticed how Thompson's eyes swept the room when he mentioned intelligence, passing over her without acknowledgement despite her specialized training. She had hoped that in a real deployment, her skills would finally be recognized as valuable rather than supplementary. Staff Sergeant Peterson raised his hand. "Sir, what kind of opposition intelligence do we have?" "Limited," Thompson admitted. "We know they're using encrypted communications, probably Russian equipment with modifications. We'll have standard intercept gear, but analysis will have to be handled in real time by unit personnel rather than being sent back to headquarters." Nota, this was exactly the kind of situation where Sarah's cryptographic training would be invaluable. But Thompson's briefing made no mention of her specialized skills. Instead, he assigned communication duties to Jamie Chen, who was competent with radio equipment but had no experience with code breaking or signal analysis. "Collins," Thompson said, finally addressing her directly, "you'll be handling supply coordination and backup communications. Make sure we stay connected to headquarters and that everyone has what they need, equipment-wise." Sarah felt her heart sink. Supply coordination was important, but it was essentially administrative work that any competent soldier could handle. Her years of specialized training, her proven ability with cryptographic analysis, her fluency in multiple languages, none of it mattered because Thompson and the others simply couldn't envision her as anything more than support personnel. Brad Hutchinson, now a corporal after his promotion 3 months earlier, spoke up from the back of the room. "Sir, what if we run into situations requiring language skills? Collins speaks a bunch of different languages, doesn't she?" His tone made it clear that he wasn't advocating for Sarah's expertise, but rather suggesting that her linguistic abilities might be useful for basic translation work, like asking locals for directions or negotiating for supplies. The suggestion felt more patronizing than supportive. "Good point, Hutchinson," Thompson replied. "Collins, if we need translation services, you'll be available for that as well." Sarah wanted to explain that her language skills went far beyond basic translation, that she could conduct sophisticated interrogations, analyze intercepted communications in multiple languages, and identify linguistic patterns that might reveal enemy intentions. But the briefing had moved on to equipment lists and timeline discussions. After the official briefing ended, Sarah approached Major Thompson privately. The room had cleared, except for a few soldiers discussing weekend plans before deployment, their voices echoing in the large space. "Sir, I wanted to discuss my role in the upcoming operation," she began, keeping her voice respectful but confident. "My intelligence training and cryptographic experience might be particularly valuable, given what you mentioned about encrypted enemy communications." Thompson looked up from the papers he was organizing, his expression patient but dismissive. "Collins, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we need to keep roles clear and simple in the field. Communications interception and analysis requires experience and judgment that comes from operational deployment. Your job is to support the mission by handling logistics and maintaining our connection to command." "I understand, sir, but I've scored consistently in the top percentile on all cryptographic and signal analysis tests. I've studied the types of encryption systems likely to be used in this region, and I'm familiar with—" "Collins," Thompson's voice carried a note of finality. "I know you want to contribute, and supply coordination is a crucial contribution. The unit depends on having someone reliable handling those responsibilities. Don't underestimate the importance of what you've been assigned." Sarah recognized the dismissal for what it was. Thompson wasn't evaluating her capabilities. He was managing what he perceived as her expectations. In his mind, she was reaching for responsibilities beyond her qualifications, and his job was to redirect her ambitions toward more appropriate tasks. "Yes, sir," she replied, knowing that further argument would only reinforce his perception of her as pushy or unaware of her limitations. As she left the briefing room, Sarah passed Corporal Martinez, who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and was considered one of the unit's most experienced soldiers. He was discussing communication protocols with Jamie Chen, and Sarah caught part of their conversation. "The thing about encrypted communications," Martinez was saying, "is that you need someone who really understands the technical side, not just radio operation. I've seen good operations fail because someone missed important details in intercepted transmissions." "Yeah," Chen agreed. "I can handle the radio equipment fine, but if we're dealing with serious encryption, I'm going to need support from intelligence back at base." Sarah paused outside the door, frustrated by the irony. Here were 2 competent soldiers, acknowledging exactly the kind of expertise she possessed, while their commanding officer had just assigned her to manage supply inventories. The gap between her actual capabilities and her assigned role felt wider than ever. The next 2 weeks were spent in intensive pre-deployment preparation. The unit rehearsed operational procedures, reviewed intelligence briefings, and conducted equipment checks. Sarah threw herself into the preparation with characteristic thoroughness, studying every available piece of information about the region's geography, political situation, and known militant groups. During her research, she discovered several interesting patterns in intercepted communications that had been analyzed by headquarters intelligence. The enemy forces were using a sophisticated encryption system that appeared to combine Russian military codes with commercial encryption software. More intriguingly, some of the transmissions contained what looked like deliberate linguistic variations that suggested either multiple operational groups or intentional misdirection. Sarah prepared a detailed analysis of these patterns, hoping to present her findings to Major Thompson before deployment. She spent hours documenting her conclusions, cross-referencing linguistic patterns with known encryption methods, and developing hypotheses about enemy communication protocols. When she requested a meeting with Thompson to discuss her research, he listened politely for exactly 4 minutes before cutting her off. "Collins, I appreciate the initiative, but we have intelligence professionals handling this kind of analysis. Your job is to focus on the logistics planning for our operation. Have you completed the supply manifests I requested?" "Yes, sir, but I thought this intelligence about communication patterns might be..." "Collins, what did I just say about staying focused on your assigned responsibilities?" Sarah handed over her carefully prepared analysis anyway. "Sir, I'd like you to have this in case the information becomes relevant during our operation." Thompson took the folder with the expression of someone accepting homework from an overeager student. "I'll review it when time permits. Right now, I need you to coordinate with the quartermaster about ammunition allocation." Sarah watched him place her folder on the bottom of a stack of papers, knowing it would likely never be opened. Everything she had learned, all the patterns she had identified, the insights that might prove crucial in a real operational environment, dismissed before being considered. But she had learned long ago that sometimes being overlooked could be an advantage. While her colleagues focused on conventional military preparations, Sarah continued her research, studying everything she could find about the region's languages, the militant groups operating there, and the technical specifications of Russian encryption equipment. She also did something else that none of her colleagues bothered with. She researched the history of intelligence failures in similar operations. Time and again, she found examples of missions that had failed because important information had been available but ignored, because crucial patterns had been identified by personnel whose expertise was dismissed, because institutional bias had prevented the right information from reaching the right people at the right time. Stay with me, because what happens next will shock you. What started as a routine deployment based on limited intelligence was about to become something much more dangerous, and the very skills that her unit had dismissed would soon become their only hope for survival. The patterns Sarah had identified, the analysis that had been ignored, the expertise that had been overlooked. All of it would soon prove to be the difference between success and catastrophe. The deployment began on a grey Thursday morning, when the unit loaded onto transport aircraft that would take them to their staging area in Germany, then to their final destination. As the plane lifted off from Fort Bragg, Sarah looked down at the base where she had spent 6 months trying to prove herself, wondering if this deployment would finally provide the opportunity she had been seeking. She had no way of knowing that within 72 hours, everyone's assumptions about her role and value would be completely shattered. The enemy they were about to face had prepared surprises that would test not just their training and equipment, but their ability to adapt when everything they thought they knew turned out to be wrong. And Sarah Collins, the overlooked intelligence specialist who had been assigned to count supplies and operate radios, was about to become the most important person in the unit. But first, they would all have to survive long enough for her expertise to matter. Sarah pressed her face against the small window, trying to reconcile the terrain below with the briefing material she had memorized, but everything seemed different. The elevation, the vegetation, even the pattern of roads and buildings scattered across the landscape. 2 minutes out, shouted the crew chief over the rotor noise. Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Standard infantry gear, communication radio, and the supply manifests that constituted her official reason for being there. Hidden in her pack, carefully folded, was the intelligence analysis that Major Thompson had dismissed, along with notes she had compiled about regional communication patterns and linguistic variations she expected to encounter. The landing was rough, kicking up clouds of dust that made visibility nearly zero for several minutes. Sarah followed her squadmates out of the helicopter, her boots hitting foreign soil for the first time in her military career. The reality of deployment hit her immediately. This wasn't training anymore. The stakes were real, the danger was real, and everything she had prepared for was about to be tested. Major Thompson established their temporary base in a partially destroyed warehouse about 2 miles from the landing zone. The building provided cover and concealment while allowing observation of the surrounding area through windows that had been blown out by previous conflicts. Sarah helped establish the communication post, setting up radio equipment and satellite links that would keep them connected to headquarters. Collins, get me a supply inventory and confirm our resupply schedule, Thompson ordered as the unit settled into defensive positions. I need to know exactly what we have and how long it will last if we get cut off from support. Sarah worked methodically through the supply check, but part of her attention was focused on the radio traffic coming through the communication post. Jamie Chen was monitoring standard military frequencies, but Sarah could hear faint transmissions on other channels, voices speaking in what sounded like Russian, mixed with other languages she couldn't immediately identify. Chen, are you picking up those other transmissions? She asked quietly during a break in official communications. Jamie adjusted his headphones and listened carefully. Yeah, I hear something, but it's not on any of the frequencies we're supposed to be monitoring. Probably just commercial radio or local emergency services. Sarah knew better. The transmission patterns, the brief bursts of communication followed by long silences, the way voices would switch between languages mid-sentence. These were exactly the kinds of patterns she had studied in her research on militant communication protocols. But Chen was focused on his assigned frequencies, and Sarah had learned not to push her insights unless directly asked. The first day passed quietly, with the unit conducting reconnaissance of their assigned sector, while Sarah managed logistics and monitored official communications. But she also used every opportunity to listen to the unofficial transmissions, gradually building a picture of enemy activity that her colleagues were missing. By evening, Sarah had identified at least 3 different groups communicating using various encryption methods. One group was using a relatively simple commercial encryption system that she could probably break given time. Another was using what sounded like Russian military codes, but with modifications that suggested local adaptation. The third group was the most interesting. They were using a combination of encrypted transmission and linguistic code switching that created multiple layers of security. During the evening briefing, Major Thompson reviewed the day's activities with obvious satisfaction. "Good work today, people. We've established our position, confirmed communication with headquarters, and conducted initial reconnaissance without incident. Intelligence suggests enemy activity in the region is probably overstated." Sarah wanted to mention the intercepted communications, but Thompson's tone made it clear he was wrapping up the briefing, not opening discussion. She held back, deciding to document what she had learned and look for a better opportunity to present her findings. That opportunity never came. The second day brought increased tensions as the unit moved deeper into their assigned area. They encountered evidence of recent militant activity, abandoned equipment, defensive positions that had been hastily evacuated, and local civilians who seemed nervous about the presence of foreign soldiers. "Something doesn't feel right," muttered Specialist Rodriguez as they conducted a patrol through a village that seemed almost deserted. "Too quiet. Where is everyone?" Staff Sergeant Peterson agreed. "Feels like they knew we were coming, like they cleared out before we arrived." Sarah had been thinking the same thing, but her interpretation was different. The intercepted communications from the previous day had included references to visitors and schedule changes that could have been warnings about their deployment. If she was right, the enemy had advanced knowledge of their mission, knowledge that could only have come from a security breach. But when she tried to raise this possibility with Peterson during a rest stop, he dismissed her concerns as inexperience talking. "Collins, every deployment feels like this at first. You're not used to how quiet these places can be. Doesn't mean anything's wrong." That afternoon, everything changed. The unit was conducting reconnaissance near a communications facility that intelligence had identified as a possible enemy command post when the first shots rang out. Sarah hit the ground with everyone else, her heart racing as bullets whined overhead and kicked up dust around their position. "Contact left! Contact left!" Peterson shouted into his radio as the unit scrambled for cover behind a low stone wall. "We're taking fire from the communications building. Multiple shooters, automatic weapons." The engagement lasted for 20 minutes, with both sides exchanging sporadic fire across about 200 meters of open ground. No one was hit, but the message was clear. The enemy knew exactly where they were and had been waiting for them. When the shooting stopped, Major Thompson called for immediate extraction to their base position. As they moved carefully back through terrain that had seemed safe hours earlier, Sarah listened to radio chatter from headquarters and realized something alarming. The enemy communications facility they had just encountered wasn't on any of the intelligence maps they had been given. Back at base, Thompson contacted headquarters for updated intelligence, while the unit established defensive positions around their warehouse. Sarah monitored communications while outwardly maintaining her supply coordination duties, but she was actually focusing on the enemy transmissions that had resumed after the engagement. What she heard made her blood run cold. The enemy forces were discussing the afternoon's encounter in detail, including specific information about the unit's movement patterns, equipment, and even references to individual soldiers by description rather than name. They knew far more about the American unit than should have been possible through casual observation. "Major Thompson," Sarah said, approaching him as he finished his communication with headquarters, "I need to discuss something important with you about enemy communications." Thompson looked up from his maps, irritation clear on his face. "Collins, unless supplies are running low or communications are down, this isn't the time for discussion. We have bigger concerns right now." "Sir, I've been monitoring enemy transmissions, and I believe they have detailed intelligence about our operation, possibly including—" "Collins!" Thompson's voice was sharp enough to draw attention from other soldiers. "I thought I made it clear that communications monitoring is Chen's responsibility. Your job is supply coordination. Are you telling me you haven't been doing your assigned job? Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks as other soldiers turned to look at the exchange. No, sir, I've completed all supply coordination tasks, but I have specialized training in... What you have is enthusiasm that's getting in the way of discipline. Chen is handling communications monitoring. Intelligence analysis is handled by headquarters. Your job is supplies. Do your job, Collins. The dismissal was public and humiliating, made worse by the fact that Sarah was trying to warn about a threat that could affect everyone's safety. She retreated to her position, burning with frustration, but forced to remain silent as enemy transmissions continued to reveal dangerous intelligence gaps. But Sarah had learned something important during that confrontation. Major Thompson's reaction hadn't just been dismissive, it had been defensive. He was clearly feeling pressure about the day's events, about intelligence failures that had left them exposed to enemy observation, about the growing realization that this deployment was more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. And Sarah was beginning to suspect that the intelligence failures weren't accidental. The patterns in the enemy communications suggested coordination with someone who had access to American operational planning. The timing of enemy movements, the detailed knowledge of unit positions, the way they seemed to anticipate rather than react to American actions, all of it pointed toward a security breach that went beyond simple tactical observation. As night fell and the unit prepared defensive positions for what everyone expected to be a dangerous evening, Sarah made a decision. She would continue her unofficial intelligence work, documenting everything she learned about enemy communications and building the evidence she needed to convince someone in authority that their mission had been compromised. She had no way of knowing that she was running out of time. The enemy forces weren't just watching and reporting, they were preparing for something much bigger. And the American unit, operating with incomplete intelligence and internal security problems they didn't even recognize, was about to walk into a trap that would test everyone's survival skills. Tomorrow would bring the crisis that Sarah had been trying to warn everyone about. And when it came, the very expertise that had been dismissed and ignored would become their only hope for escape. But first, Sarah would have to survive long enough to prove that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one shooting at you. It's the one who convinces you to ignore the person trying to save your life. But her warnings had been ignored, and now the American unit found itself surrounded by hostile forces who seemed to know exactly where they were and exactly how to cut off their escape routes. Sarah woke to the sound of incoming mortars, followed immediately by automatic weapons fire from 3 different directions. The warehouse that had seemed like adequate shelter the night before now felt like a trap, with enemy forces positioned on high ground that commanded clear fields of fire toward all the obvious exit points. "Collins, get on the radio and call for immediate extraction!" Major Thompson shouted as he took cover behind an overturned table, bullets splintering the wood above his head. "Tell headquarters we need air support now." Sarah scrambled to the communication post, trying to raise headquarters, while incoming fire made the radio equipment dance and spark. After several attempts, she managed to establish contact, but the news wasn't good. "Alpha Base, this is Eagle 7, came the voice through static and interference. "Weather conditions prevent immediate air support. Heavy fog, visibility less than 100 meters. Earliest possible extraction is 8 hours, weather permitting." 8 hours. Sarah looked around the warehouse, taking quick inventory of their tactical situation, while bullets continued to pepper their position. They had enough ammunition for maybe 2 hours of sustained combat, limited medical supplies, and no heavy weapons capable of dealing with the mortars that were systematically destroying their cover. "Thompson to all positions," the major broadcast on the unit radio network. "We're dug in here until extraction arrives. Conserve ammunition, stay low, and watch for enemy attempts to close distance." But Sarah could see what Thompson apparently couldn't. Their defensive position was untenable. The enemy had positioned forces on 3 sides, with the 4th side offering only open ground that would expose anyone attempting to escape. The mortar fire was walking steadily closer to their position, and once the enemy had the range figured out, the warehouse would become uninhabitable. More importantly, Sarah had been listening to enemy communications throughout the morning, and what she heard confirmed her worst suspicions. The attacking forces weren't just conducting a random engagement. They were implementing a carefully planned operation designed to capture or eliminate the American unit while preventing any escape or rescue. "Thompson," Sarah called out during a brief lull in incoming fire, "I need to tell you what I've learned from enemy communications." "Collins, get back on that radio and try to reach any available support units," Thompson replied without looking in her direction. "We need help, not discussion." "Sir, they know we're here because someone told them. This isn't a chance encounter. It's a planned ambush based on inside information." Thompson finally looked at her, his face showing the strain of command under fire. "Collins, I don't have time for conspiracy theories. Contact headquarters again and find out about air support." Sarah wanted to explain everything she had learned. How the enemy forces had specific knowledge of their mission timeline, their equipment, even their communication frequencies. How the attack had been coordinated with precision that suggested advanced planning rather than opportunistic engagement. How the intercepted communications included references to a source who had provided detailed information about American operations. But before she could say more, Corporal Martinez called out from his position near the eastern windows. "Major, we've got movement on the right flank. Looks like they're trying to get close enough for a direct assault." The next few hours passed in a blur of defensive fire, tactical radio calls, and gradually dwindling ammunition supplies. Sarah divided her time between official communication duties and unofficial monitoring of enemy transmissions, building an increasingly clear picture of what they were facing. The enemy forces were well-equipped, professionally trained, and operating according to a detailed plan that included contingencies for various American responses. They had positioned snipers to prevent movement between buildings, mortar teams to destroy defensive positions, and assault teams ready to exploit any weaknesses in the American perimeter. More concerning, Sarah heard multiple references to timing and coordination with other operations. This wasn't an isolated engagement. It was part of something larger, possibly including attacks on other American units or facilities in the region. "Major Thompson," Sarah said during a brief pause in combat, "I've been monitoring enemy communications, and I need to share what I've learned." Thompson was reloading his rifle, his movements showing the efficient economy of someone conserving both ammunition and energy. "Collins, unless you've reached air support or additional ground units, I don't have time to listen." "Sir, they're not just attacking us. This is coordinated with other operations, and they have detailed intelligence about our mission that they shouldn't have access to." "Collins," Thompson's voice carried the sharp edge of a man under extreme stress. "Your job is communications with headquarters, not intelligence analysis. Focus on your assigned responsibilities." Sarah felt the familiar frustration of being dismissed when she had crucial information, but this time the stakes were life and death. She made a decision that went against everything she had been taught about military hierarchy and chain of command. She was going to take action based on her analysis, regardless of whether she had permission. While Thompson coordinated defensive positions and other soldiers focused on immediate threats, Sarah used her access to the radio equipment to conduct her own intelligence operation. She had identified the primary enemy communication frequency and had been tracking their operational language long enough to understand their tactical terminology. What she learned made her realize that conventional defensive tactics wouldn't save them. The enemy forces weren't planning to overrun their position directly. Instead, they were coordinating with another unit that was moving to cut off the American extraction route. When the rescue helicopters arrived in 8 hours, they would fly into a carefully prepared ambush. The American unit wasn't just trapped in the warehouse, they were bait in a larger operation designed to destroy both the ground unit and the rescue forces that would attempt to save them. Sarah tried once more to get Thompson's attention, but he was coordinating a counterattack against enemy positions that were getting dangerously close to their perimeter. The sound of gunfire and explosions made communication nearly impossible. And even if she could get him to listen, she wasn't sure he would believe intelligence that came from sources he had repeatedly told her to ignore. So Sarah did something that could have resulted in court-martial under normal circumstances. She took it upon herself to contact headquarters directly and share the intelligence she had developed, bypassing the chain of command because the chain of command was about to get everyone killed. Eagle 7, this is Alpha Unit Communications, she transmitted during a lull in enemy fire. I have critical intelligence about enemy operations that affects extraction planning. Alpha Communications, this is Eagle 7. Put your commanding officer on the radio. Eagle 7, Major Thompson is engaged in defensive operations. I have specialized intelligence training and have been monitoring enemy communications. They are coordinating an ambush of rescue forces. Extraction route is compromised. There was a long pause, filled with static and the distant sound of gunfire. Alpha Communications, relay that message through your commanding officer and have him contact us directly. Sarah realized that even headquarters wouldn't listen to her without authorization from Thompson. The same institutional bias that had dismissed her expertise throughout her career was about to prevent her from saving lives, including her own. But she had one more option, one that would either prove her worth or destroy her military career entirely. She had been tracking enemy communications long enough to understand their encryption method, and she had identified a pattern that might allow her to do more than just gather intelligence. She might be able to disrupt their communications entirely, turning their own tactical advantage against them. The plan was risky and potentially disastrous if it failed. But as Sarah listened to enemy forces coordinating their next phase of attack, she realized that conventional military hierarchy and procedure weren't going to save them. Sometimes, survival required someone to step outside their assigned role and take action based on knowledge that others couldn't or wouldn't recognize. The question was whether Sarah had enough time to prove her theory before the enemy's next assault overran their position, and whether her unit would survive long enough to realize that the soldier they had been ignoring was actually the key to their escape. The linguistic patterns she had documented, the technical specifications she had studied, and the cryptographic variations she had predicted were all playing out exactly as she had theorized. But now, she could do more than just decode their communications. She had identified a vulnerability in their encryption protocol that would allow her to inject false information into their communication network, potentially disrupting their coordination at the moment when they least expected interference. "Chen!" Sarah called out during a brief lull in incoming fire. "I need to use the communication equipment for something that might help us get out of this." Jamie Chen was hunched over the radio, trying to re-establish contact with headquarters after their last transmission had been cut off by enemy jamming. "Collins, I'm trying to reach air support. Unless you've got another way to contact rescue forces, I need to keep working on this." "I do have another way," Sarah said, moving closer so she could speak without shouting over the gunfire. "I can disrupt enemy communications and make them think their own command is ordering a tactical withdrawal." Chen looked at her with the expression of someone who wasn't sure whether to take her seriously. "Collins, that's not how radio equipment works. We can't just hack into enemy communications and start giving them orders." "Actually, we can," Sarah explained quickly, "if we understand their encryption method and can identify their command authentication protocols. I've been tracking their communications all morning, and I think I can exploit a weakness in their system." Before Chen could respond, another barrage of mortar fire forced both of them to take cover as debris rained down from the ceiling. When the bombardment stopped, Sarah could hear Thompson organizing a response to what sounded like an enemy assault team approaching from the south. "Collins, get back on that radio and try to reach anybody who can provide support," Thompson shouted from his position near the windows. "We're running out of time and ammunition." Sarah knew that conventional radio communication wasn't going to save them. The enemy had demonstrated their ability to jam American frequencies and intercept transmissions, but they probably weren't expecting their own communication system to be compromised by an American soldier they didn't know existed. Working quickly while Chen focused on official communication attempts, Sarah used her access to the radio equipment to begin implementing her plan. She had memorized enough of the enemy communication protocols to attempt impersonation of their command frequency, and she had identified the linguistic patterns that would make her false transmissions sound authentic. The first test was simple: a brief transmission that appeared to come from an enemy command unit ordering one of the assault teams to change position. If her analysis was correct, the team would respond with a confirmation and then actually move according to her false orders. Sarah transmitted the order using the technical specifications she had studied and the authentication codes she had derived from intercepted communications. She held her breath as she waited for a response, knowing that failure would not only waste precious time, but potentially alert the enemy to American intelligence capabilities they didn't know they were facing. The response came within 30 seconds, a confirmation of the order followed by observable movement as one of the enemy assault teams repositioned exactly as Sarah had directed. Her analysis had been correct. She could effectively issue orders to enemy forces using their own communication system. "Chen, watch what happens to the fire coming from the building to our east," Sarah said as she prepared her next transmission. "Why? What are you doing?" "I'm ordering them to fall back and regroup with another unit." Chen looked at her as if she had lost her mind, but he dutifully watched the eastern position while Sarah transmitted another false order. Within minutes, the heavy machine gun fire that had been pinning down part of their unit stopped entirely as the enemy team withdrew from their position. "How did you?" Chen started to ask, but Thompson's voice cut through their conversation. "Collins, Chen, what's happening with communications? Are you reaching anybody?" Sarah made a quick decision. Rather than trying to explain her unauthorized intelligence operation, she would demonstrate its effectiveness by using it to solve their immediate tactical problem. "Sir, I'm implementing a communication disruption plan that should give us an opportunity to break out of this position," she called back. "What kind of plan?" Thompson demanded. His attention split between her answer and the enemy fire that continued to impact their position. "I'm using enemy communication frequencies to issue false orders that will create confusion and potentially open an escape route." Thompson stared at her for a moment, as if she had suggested they could escape by flying. "Collins, that's not how military communications work. You can't just start transmitting on enemy frequencies and expect them to listen to you." "Actually, sir, I can," Sarah replied, "because I've been studying their encryption methods and communication protocols since before deployment. I know how their system works, and I know how to exploit its weaknesses." Before Thompson could respond, Sarah transmitted another false order, this one directing enemy mortar teams to cease fire and relocate to support a fictional attack on American forces in a different sector. If it worked, the devastating mortar fire that had been systematically destroying their defensive positions would stop. The warehouse fell quiet for the first time in 6 hours as enemy mortar fire shifted away from their position. Sarah followed up with additional false transmissions, creating the impression that American reinforcements were approaching from multiple directions and ordering enemy units to establish defensive positions away from the warehouse. Thompson watched the tactical situation change in real time as enemy fire slackened and enemy positions began to shift. After 15 minutes of observing these changes, He approached Sarah's position with an expression that mixed amazement with something that might have been embarrassment. "Collins, how long have you been able to do this?" "I've been monitoring and analyzing enemy communication since we arrived, sir. I tried to brief you on my findings, but—" "Never mind that now," Thompson interrupted. "Can you create enough confusion to give us a clear escape route?" Sarah looked at the communication equipment, then at the maps showing terrain between their position and potential extraction sites. "Yes, sir. But I'll need to coordinate the deception with our actual movement. If I can make them think we're moving in one direction while we actually escape in another, we might be able to break contact entirely." For the first time since deployment began, Thompson looked at Sarah as if he were seeing her clearly. "Do it. What do you need?" "I need Chen to help with radio management while I coordinate false enemy communications. And I need you to trust my analysis about their tactical deployment and response patterns." Thompson nodded slowly. "Chen, support Collins in whatever she needs. Everyone else prepare for movement in 15 minutes. Collins, you've got the lead on this operation." It was the first time in her military career that Sarah had been given operational authority based on her specialized expertise rather than being assigned to support roles. The irony wasn't lost on her. It had taken a life-threatening crisis for her commanding officer to recognize abilities that had been available all along. Working with methodical precision, Sarah began implementing a complex deception operation that would have been impossible without her months of studying enemy communication patterns. She created false intelligence, suggesting that American reinforcements were approaching from the north, prompting enemy units to shift their positions to meet this fictional threat. She then generated fake communications, ordering enemy forces to maintain radio silence to avoid detection, effectively blinding their coordination at the crucial moment when the American unit would attempt escape. Finally, she transmitted orders for enemy units to establish defensive positions in locations that would actually facilitate American movement toward the extraction site, making the enemy complicit in their own tactical disadvantage. "Sir, we have a window," Sarah announced after 30 minutes of communication warfare. "Enemy forces are repositioned based on false intelligence I've provided. We have approximately 20 minutes before they realize they've been deceived." Thompson gathered the unit for quick movement instructions, his tone reflecting new respect for Sarah's capabilities. "Thanks to Collins' intelligence work, we have an opportunity to break contact and reach the extraction site. Move fast, move quiet, and follow Collins' assessment of enemy positions." As the unit prepared to leave the warehouse that had been their prison for 6 hours, Sarah continued monitoring enemy communications to ensure her deception was holding. What she heard in those final transmissions before they moved out confirmed something she had suspected but couldn't prove until now. One of the enemy voices was speaking with an American accent, providing updates about American unit strength and tactical dispositions. Someone with access to American operational planning was actively collaborating with enemy forces, feeding them intelligence that had made the ambush possible. Sarah had found the source of their security breach, but now she faced an even more complex challenge. How do you tell your commanding officer that someone with American military access is committing treason when you've just spent months having your intelligence expertise dismissed and ignored? The escape from the warehouse was just the beginning. Sarah's newfound credibility would soon be tested by revelations that went far beyond tactical intelligence, reaching into questions of loyalty, betrayal, and the deadly consequences of institutional prejudice that had nearly gotten everyone killed. But first, they had to survive the next 20 minutes and reach safety. And Sarah Collins, the overlooked intelligence specialist who had been assigned to count supplies, was now the person everyone's life depended on.